Refocusing our reaction to the development on guns today, let's get the opposition's take on the Liberal government's reversal. Dane Lloyd is a Conservative MP on the Public Safety Committee. Peter Julian is the NDP House Leader. Thank you both for coming into the studio to speak with us today. Mr. Lloyd, I'm going to start with you. What is your reaction to what's happened with the Liberal decision to pull these amendments?
Well, I think it's a sign of a significant defeat for the Liberals. The grassroots swell of Canadians over the past number of weeks who have spoken out against this proposed ban to ban hunting rifles and shotguns has been overwhelming. And for the government to pull this key amendment at this time is a sign that they're in trouble.
Mr. Julian, what's your reaction?
Well, I don't think the government had a choice. They put forward an amendment that was so confusing and so badly done, so badly botched, that it did two things. First, it sabotaged the principles of C-21, the handgun freeze, of course, we support in the NDP. That could have been through the House in December if we hadn't had this amendment basically blow up all of the discussions around this. And so, as a result, the NDP put a lot of procedural pressure on the Liberals this week. As you know, there was going to be ultimately a referral from the committee to the Speaker. The Speaker would have been called upon to rule it, and it would have been ruled out of order as an out-of-scope amendment anyhow. So these amendments were doomed to go down. I think what the Liberals have done is basically done the thing that they were forced to do by the NDP and take a step back so that there can be consideration now for the principle of the bill that, as I mentioned, should have gone through in December.
Mr. Lloyd, you heard from Minister Mendicino there, and he says he wants to work with the opposition parties to come up with solutions, come up ideas. Is there any common ground you can find on this bill with the Liberals?
Look, I think this bill is very misleading. I don't think it's going to achieve the public safety outcomes that this government has been claiming it's going to achieve. I think it's very disingenuous of the minister to say that they're listening and that they're open to consultation. We had Indigenous witnesses come to come to testify on Bill C-21 before these amendments were put forward, and they were saying loud and clear that this government had not consulted with them, was not listening to them, and then they still move forward with these amendments. And the government only listened when the people and the Conservatives forced them to listen by fighting this tooth and nail in the House of Commons.
But he says right now that he wants to have a conversation now. Are you open to having a conversation about this?
Everything's on the table. We're still looking at the bill. We have a number of meetings that are open to consultation. I think there's room for some common sense amendments to enhance public safety for Canadians, but I'm very wary about these Liberals. I think if they had a majority, they would have pushed through these amendments. They would have pushed through these amendments.
Well, that's something we asked Minister about, and Mr. Julian, do you think that this is something that the way that Minister Mendicino answered that question, I thought it prompted when we were asking him about what went wrong and why it went wrong and how it went wrong. We were asking, he talked about consultation, and he talked about how in a minority government you need more consultation. And so we put to him a number of times, I didn't think I got a clear answer on that, on whether they would have pushed ahead with the amendments on this if they did have that majority government. You know, what do you make of where things go from here?
Well, first off, I take issue with the idea that the Conservatives had anything to do with the withdrawal of the amendment. The Conservatives did not lift a procedural finger through this whole battle. They were fundraising off it, but Pierre Poilievre did absolutely nothing to actually be the adults in the room and push back against the amendment, but also ensure that we have in place the freeze on handguns. And what's disturbing about this whole process, Katie, is that we had both the Liberals and Conservatives fundraising rather than doing the right thing and putting in place a kind of solid legislation that accomplishes the idea of freezing handguns. This is something I think that the NDP has stepped up on. Jagmeet Singh and Alistair McGregor, our critic, were the adults in the room. We now have space, I think, to consider important issues. For example, ghost guns. We've seen in the United States a 1,000% rise in the use of these untraceable ghost guns in crime. And so this should be something that all parties agree on, that there should be some amendments that tackle that issue, which is an issue for law enforcement and an issue of Canadians that may be facing violence. This is something that hopefully all members of Parliament can agree to. But the Liberals have to start consulting. They have to start discussing with other parties, and hopefully that's something that'll happen moving forward from today.
I do take exception with what Julian just said here, Mr. Julian. At the very beginning, when these amendments were put forward, the Conservatives called a vote. I called a vote on whether or not these amendments were in scope. And the NDP actually voted with the Liberals to rule that these amendments were in scope at the committee at that time. I will give it to them that at a later date, after weeks of Conservatives filibustering the bill without the NDP lifting a finger and speaking out against this bill at all, they did finally listen to their constituents across rural Canada and speak out against this bill. I do give credit to Alistair McGregor for doing that. They did put forward this amendment to notice to seek the Speaker to rule this out of scope, but they did vote that this was in scope at the very beginning of these amendments.
And as Mr. Lloyd's aware, this is something that the Speaker decides, not the committee. So my point stands. The Conservatives did not lift a procedural finger in the House of Commons. They did not do any of the things that would have led to the result that we saw today.
And you take issue with the party's fundraising off this?
I see both Conservatives and Liberals fundraising off this when they should be thinking about public policy. This is the important thing that I think is often forgotten by both of these parties, that we have to look at the public interest, we have to do the consultation, we have to make sure if an amendment is put forward, withdraw it when it's so badly botched that it is not going to do the job that it purports to do. And this is something that I think the government forgot. Hopefully today this will move forward in a more effective way. But also the Conservatives, rather, if they say they're opposed to an amendment, do something about it. Don't just milk money from farmers and hunters, which is what they've been doing, fundraising for the last 2 months, rather than doing anything effective that would have actually forced the withdrawal of the amendment.
Mr. Lloyd, your response to that?
Well, we had no idea whether the NDP were actually going to support us on this critical motion. We waited for weeks before the NDP spoke out against it. And if Conservatives hadn't been filibustering this bill for weeks and weeks, the NDP and the Bloc likely would have voted in support of these amendments, and we wouldn't be where we're at today.
Not true. That's simply not true.
Well, we'll never know because they didn't speak out about it in the first number of weeks. So Conservatives fought this tooth and nail. We've been successful, but this isn't over. This isn't over. We know that the government, if they get a majority, or they're going to come back possibly with a new amendment or future legislation.
One thing I will bring up, that the Liberals did have a minority from 2015 to 2019, and they didn't do this. So I know that we did have some legitimate questions to Minister Mendicino today about that. But do you really think that this is where this is headed? If the Liberals, is this just election posturing and trying to sort of get at fundraising here, or what is this a bigger picture concern?
This is absolutely election posturing. There's very marginal effects on public safety of these proposals that the Liberals are putting forward. These proposals are designed to divide Canadians between rural and urban, between gun owners and non-gun owners, hunters and non-hunters. It's purely designed for political purposes to be used in an election to scaremonger Canadians and to divide Canadians, not unite Canadians.
Mr. Julian, do you take exception to that?
Well, the handgun freeze is something that hopefully all Canadians can support. The reality is most of the mass shootings that we've seen have involved handguns. So that there is a very important public policy element to increase public safety. No doubt about that. But I think the reality is we need to return to a calmer approach on this. We've had Liberals and Conservative fundraising off this rather than looking at the public policy, doing the consultation, and if an amendment is wrong, actually taking action to ensure that that amendment doesn't go through. And I think both parties, both the Liberals and Conservatives, have failed in this exercise. Hopefully, moving forward, there will be more adults in the room actually looking at public policy and the public interest.
Do you think there needs to be more of a focus on policy here rather than fundraising, to Mr. Julian's point?
Absolutely. Like, I've been focused on policy. I've been in the weeds, in the trenches on this Bill C-21 ever since it came out. Always trying to bring forward common sense amendments, common sense ideas to the committee to make this a better bill. And unfortunately, I believe the Liberals, this entire bill is designed as an election tactic, and that's really unfortunate for all Canadians.
All right, we're going to pause the conversation there. I want to thank you both for your time today. Thank you for coming in. Mr. Lloyd, Mr. Julian, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.